Okay, we're back. The Future Proof podcast by Co-AI team is back. It's July 15th, Monday. We normally record on a Friday, but we had to switch it to a Monday. A lot of us have been traveling around, so we've taken a little bit of time off. I personally went to Italy and had an awesome time. And I think, Francesca, you went to Philippines?
I did, yes. Took some time
And
off to go back home.
that's great. And Shane, you've been holding it down, right? And
Holding it down.
holding it down. All right. Well, we're back and we're excited to kind of jump into it. We know that taking a time away from the AI space means you've lost probably a million announcements and some really cool stuff to catch on. But I think today's topic, which we discussed earlier, was we kind of really wanted to focus on AI and the creative industry, and probably more specifically how Gen.ai is operating in there. We know from experience and by like analyzing the space pretty carefully that AI and Gen AI is really sort of making some interesting impact on the advertising industry as it relates to creativity, of course, film and television, just general content creation, and even as far as we've been seeing some interesting stuff in the fashion and luxury world. So we're going to kind of just jump in. We're going to do some wave tips, and we might dive deep on some tools. We're just going to see how this conversation goes. But we're excited to talk about it because it is creating a great impact to the folks that are sort of making, all things creativity. So with that said, maybe I'll toss it over to Francesca. She can kind of send us in the right direction, and we can all just start chiming in. Where do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. I'm really, really excited about this topic today for many reasons. My background, as Shane and Anthony had mentioned in the first podcast that I joined, is certainly in artificial intelligence and computer science, but I also studied history as an undergrad, and so I've always been interested in the intersection of tech with the humanities. And I think creativity has always been a very interesting concept, particularly when thinking about how it intersects with technology and specifically with AI. When I used to teach high school students and a little bit of middle school as well, I always did a discussion session that was a hit with the students about AI and art. At the time, AI was not as sophisticated as it is today, but there were still instances of AI models that could, take the style of a famous artist and then put apply that style onto maybe an image of a cat or an image of a landscape. And I'd always ask the student, is this art? If it was created by an AI model, do you think that's art? And I imagine if I had that conversation 3 years later, today, it would have a very, very different discussion from back then. So the idea of AI and creativity is always something that I think about when I think about the intersection of technology and society. I think where I want to start before we get into some of the really relevant industries that Anthony mentioned is just giving an overview of AI as it is today, as maybe many people are familiar with, maybe some tools even that you could use right now if you haven't used them yet, and talk about how one gets from maybe an idea to using AI to create an image. And so I'll start with a very simple example, and then maybe Shane can talk through more specific use cases or specific tools. But what really impresses me about Gen AI and creating any type of visual image, maybe any kind of visual media, is that it mimics a very similar workflow to that of text generation. And so by now you've heard us talk about various various text generation tools like ChatGPT, like Claude, like Gemini, and we've talked about, this very familiar text-based prompt workflow where you give something like ChatGPT a text-based prompt, like write me an email that requests from my manager that I can take some time off, right? And you get the output of text. What impresses me about Gen AI and maybe more creative industry applications is that it follows that similar text-based prompt format to then create an image, some kind of uh, visual output. And that, to me, seems unprecedented, that you could prompt something like ChatGPT, which uses DALL-E, and if you have the paid version of ChatGPT, you'll be able to do this. Right now, you can prompt it and say, hey, generate an image of a turtle and a rabbit holding hands in the aspect ratio of a greeting card so that I can wish my friend good luck on her journey. Something like that. And it will produce that for you. And you can follow the same kind of multi-shot prompting where you iterate asking it, okay, make the turtle look happier, maybe show multiple turtles. Oh, her favorite color is pink, add more pink. You can go through that same workflow as you did with text generation, but get visual output each time. And I think that's just very exciting in terms of allowing creativity to flourish in ways that it hadn't before, but also applications for people in the creative industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think the turtle is a great example. And I know Shane's got like great data and research on lots of other apps, but I think I'm also amazed by the way you can continually ask whether it's Dolly or any image generator more and more stuff, and you just keep getting more and more stuff. But Shane, why don't you jump in with some tools?
Well, I mean, I think the when I think of the tools landscape for uh, not just creativity but image generation very specifically, I think it kind of falls in two broad categories. There's straight up image generation, where you're creating images that just didn't exist before. And then there's an entire suite of image editing tools, and these can do anything from changing the color of a photo to restoring an old photograph to removing objects in the photo, face swaps,
Mm.
to even turning photographs and images into video. And they come in a variety of different, forms, right? A lot of them are web
Yeah.
apps. I think the one that's stolen most of the headlines in the last, couple of years is probably Midjourney, which people, in the inside of the industry talk about all the time. But I'm still surprised at just how few people, in the more quote unquote mass market really know of it, or how to use it. And
Mm.
that, I think, speaks to the fact that a lot of these tools are still not very easy to use, right? But there's a range of mobile apps out there that I think are also really exciting. But the one I think that we probably use the most now, in addition to Midjourney, Leonardo has emerged as a favorite of ours internally. And I think it's because it addresses that usability issue.
Mm.
Midjourney, I think, is probably my favorite as far as just raw capabilities, but you really have to understand how to talk to it, right? You have to understand how to prompt it. And there are countless parameters, as they say, which are essentially code words for how to get it to do very specific things like aspect ratio that you mentioned, Francesca. That language, I think people are still learning. And it's not
Mhm.
always the most intuitive thing to do. It's not the easiest learning curve to go up.
Yeah.
And that's where I think tools like Leonardo, which essentially do something very similar, I think are starting to gain market share because they make the process of getting in, especially if you're a beginner, just very easy. And then, of course, you see, all the big, tools providers, especially design platforms like Canva,
Mm. Mhm.
the Adobe Creative Suite, starting to now fold in image generation capabilities because ultimately, you can create imagery for a variety of different reasons, right? It could be for creating a t-shirt, it could be putting on a postcard like you mentioned. And I think where the key innovation is going to be for a lot of these tools is how they incorporate those capabilities into a specific workflow,
Mm.
right? Because you also don't want to be going to one place to create it, another place to to edit it, and then yet another place to incorporate it into that card, like you're talking about. But I think we're tracking hundreds and hundreds of different tools that really fall in a range of different spots on that spectrum when it comes to either creating or editing the images.
So, in terms of usability, if I'm someone who has never interacted with any of these tools before, what are some of the key things that you would recommend to a first timer to think about before they even, send in their first prompt? So let's say
Mm.
I'm, opening Midjourney or Leonardo or, any of these other tools, ChatGPT, um, that uses DALL-E. What should I think about in my prompt to maybe be wowed by the output that I'm going to get? Are there any,
Well,
specific things?
yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is really to think about the purpose behind the project, right?
Mm,
Um,
mhm,
I'd say something like Midjourney is very general purpose, and it really only does image generation. In fact, even editing, current images that you're working with, I think can be really difficult in Midjourney, and getting it to continue to, produce different variations of the same one. You don't really have a ton of control, at least not compared to the way an artist would have ultimate control over everything he
sure.
or she is doing. But I would really encourage people to think through, what is the purpose for doing this to begin with?
Mm,
Because there are a range of tools that are very
so,
purpose built for specific industries, right? So there's one tool in particular that's immediately jumping to mind for me called Ad Creative. It's adcreative.ai. And you can call it an image generation tool because that's what it's doing, but it's really a marketing piece of software. And
mm,
what's so great about it is that you can, among other things, including generating images for ads, you can upload a brand guide. All of your colors. You can pick your fonts. The ultimate purpose is to create things like, banner ads, Instagram posts, right? So think through the workflow. What is it you're trying to accomplish with the image? Where is it going, right? Because there's so many tools that now have these, image generation and editing
yeah,
capabilities baked in. Um, e-commerce is another example. There's a range of tools out there now that are purpose built to just produce product visualizations, right? 3D product visualizations, right? And they will come with capabilities that some of the more general purpose tools just don't yet have.
yeah. I really like that actually as sort of a starting step to take, asking yourself what the purpose of even using these tools are. And, there is a chance there is no purpose. Like maybe you are a listener and you
Yeah.
think it's really cool that you can kind of create visual output with just words, and that's fine. But you mentioned with Ad Creative, you can sort of upload a brand guide, and I imagine this is the case with many of the other tools out there. One thing that I really like about this new technology is we talk about multimodality a lot. We talk about the fact that multimodality is going to be a differentiator for many of these Gen AI tools in that it can deal with text, it can deal with images, it can deal with sound, video, etc. And if you have some source materials that you can feed into an image generator, the multimodality will help a lot. And one example that comes to mind is I do not have experience in graphic design at all, but when I have uh, founded education programs, companies, etc. It's like a logo is so important. And I always have an idea that I can sketch, but then need to hand that to some professional graphic designer. Or maybe, when designing an app, there is a certain layout that I can visualize and sketch, but then need to hand that over to a professional. And that to me is something that I could start doing with a with Gen AI, that I can have the words in my head alongside maybe a rudimentary sketch of, I want this logo to capture these kinds of qualities with these colors to excite this audience, and potentially get to a point quicker and with less intermediary steps.
I'm absolutely. I
Yeah,
mean, I
and
think
you
that
mentioned sketching, right? That's another I think consideration, right? So it's not just why
Hmm.
you're doing it, but it's how you currently work, right? And how you want to continue to work, right? And then there are tools now that you can go from, instead of text to image, you can go from sketch to image, right? So the multimodality, I think, is very relevant when you think about, where do you like to work? How do you like to work? Are you more hands-on? Are you more of do you have artistic abilities already? That factors into the tool selection too.
Yeah, the sketch to image is cool, for sure. I mean, I think the way you phrased it, Francesca, is like lots of us, we have really great ideas, and we find that our dexterity is quite not as proficient as our ideas. And I think that's where Gen AI really starts to augment the creative worker, whether you're first time worker or a professional.
Right.
And I think what Shane just talked about was you could sketch a logo, but you can also recently Shane was sketching was handing, like, I think, sketches, or just asking a specific AI to give him a fully rendered creative web page, like. And so it's like, the idea, the theme here is we're talking about how AI is effective in the creative space, both professional and sort of non-professional, but it's really sort of happening at almost every slice. Like, oh, you want to build a landing page for your a course that you're doing, and you're not good at building the web page, but you could describe it or give it a sketch and say, give me 5 options of the way it would look. Like, we're really impressed with that's happening. What's the name of that tool, Shane, that you were using?
There's a couple I've been experimenting with. One is called Galileo, which I've been really impressed with. I mean, you can see where they've got some obvious areas to improve, but if you just consider what it's capable of doing, right, which is essentially typing in a text prompt or a description of what you want, and then not only will it generate several different iterations of an entire UI for you, you can actually, with a single click, copy and then paste it directly into a design tool like Figma, right? So I find it useful not for getting back a final product of something I want to use, but as a thought partner more than anything. I think it's like, okay, what could it look like if this was my goal for this landing page or this website? Another one that I've tried out, not as much, is v0.dev. It's a Vercel product. Very similar product. I think they each have strengths and weaknesses. But the broader point for me, again, is really just like, it's not just one image generation tool that you should use. Midjourney is, like, again, the one that I think tends to suck all the air out of the room. Like, there are literally countless tools for everything, and I've got a list. There are tools specifically for infographics, for logos. Looka is a great tool for logo design. Photography, range of different photography tools. And then, of course, we mentioned industry, e-commerce, marketing. There's just a range of different tools out there. Part of the problem is it's hard to find them.
The simplest sort of like work that you don't want to have to do is like cutting out backgrounds of images, and so where AI's been like a really great tool for lots of people, whether they're professionals or non-professionals, is you can upload an image and just say remove the background. And there are full websites that just did that, and now Adobe is offering that in both their Express product and their of course in the Photoshop product, but even in the Photoshop product, you'd have to like painstakingly like remove it. But that, like, AI is now becoming really, really good at removing backgrounds. And so and it's also really good at the generative side. Is like, let's say you have a background of a puppy on a lawn, but you actually want to include something else. You can just like type in what you want and then just say increase the canvas size, and you could add something to the image that didn't exist. So
this is where I think players like the big established incumbents in this space now really have a leg up. Canva, I think, is really good at this. Adobe Express, believe it or not, has become one of my favorite tools to use.
Well, I was gonna say that, like, I think it was the recent Google Pixel ad shows that you can do that with your phone, which I think has just become the new camera, right, in your pocket.
Yeah, and not to mention Apple Intelligence, especially with some of the, we talked about sketching earlier. Some of the new features on their iPads, I think, are really incredible.
Yeah, and so big players that are, in the creative space specifically, and then like Adobe, like Canva, and then also just big AI players at large that are trying to integrate AI in as many features and as many products and workflows as possible. I had a question because we've covered so far sort of how someone who, like me, I am not a like professionally trained creative. I do not have a background in graphic design and web design, all of that, and I think I can see very easily the potential of folding in Gen AI to tasks that were probably very troublesome for me to do before Gen AI, or that would take me a long time because I would need to involve many third parties. But I want to sort of look at the other side. And since ChatGPT came into pop culture almost 2 years ago, I feel like the discussion of jobs has never left its side. It is as if every new AI company that finds the spotlight, every new AI development that gets put out there, there is an accompanying question about what this means for jobs. And I think the creative industry is really interesting because it maybe was one of the industries that felt initially further away from that jobs discussion. And now we've gotten to a point where the technology is, getting sophisticated enough that this is a discussion people within the industry are having. And so I wanted to open up the conversation before we dive into specific industries about jobs, AI, and the creative industry, and where you think that might be headed, or is sort of the discussion about it overstating the
I don't
replacement of jobs, or where you find your
I mean,
mind wandering when you think about that.
like my mind is wandering, I mean, we Shane and I've talked about this. I mean, there's definitely going to be you're going to get impacted immediately now in the creative space with AI because it does so many things so fast. And it's not good enough for finished work. So that you're still going to need to be involved as a creative person, whether you're working on a video game or a commercial production for, an advert with video. But I think like if you take the whole pipeline of iterating through a whole process, it's like, AI helps you early on in like in just sort of like pre-production of an idea. Like just give me looks, give me colors, give me what we just, all pre-po work. Just we would use Mid-Journey for sure, rather than sending out, for illustrators to draw everything and all that kind of stuff. So when you look at it, you're like, as a producer, as a creative director, you might actually be using those tools instead of turning to hiring 3 vendors, you might actually just start exploring rapidly yourself, right? Whereas you used to have to like want to hire people because that would be, so it starts way back before you even get to like production. You could happen in pre-production and post-production as well. So I think jobs are going to get, they're in question. It doesn't mean that they all go away, but I think they're going to get impacted. And just because I've worked in this industry before, and we'll throw it over to Shane, but like I was, I used to work with film cameras, and then we went to digital, right? But in the film camera business, when you used to use film in a camera to shoot, there were whole industries available to support you. There were people that sold you film. There were people that developed your film. There was people that actually would scan your film. There were people on sets that would load your cameras with film. And then it went to digital, and like all those jobs were essentially gone. But then we had to develop a whole new world of like, who's going to manage the data on the set? You know what I mean? Who's going to process the data on the set? Like so as the jobs might shift as much as some will disappear, but in the creative spaces, creativity has always been exploring new technologies to use to get a better picture, a better audio tone, or a better anything. And so I don't see AI or Gen AI as sort of existential for the creative space, but it is definitely something that if you're in the space, you should start using, and there's a variety of ways to use it. So that would be the way I'd answer that question for you. If I'm hitting that, maybe Shane could add some more color to it as well.
I mean, it's such a huge question. I mean, the way I kind of see it is, and Francesca, you shared I think a really great article on this topic, the Harvard Business Review article that talks about different potential futures, which I think we should go back to. But the way I kind of
Yeah.
see it is, number one, I think these creative tools in particular are so emblematic of the AI and jobs issue, probably the most emblematic out of all of the different AI tools that are out there right now. Maybe because you're starting to see the repercussions immediately, especially from a legal perspective. Like, think of all the copyright, battles that are going on because of the work that was used, the creative work that was used to train these very models, right? So like,
Yeah.
it's already having a major impact. I think the lens that I really look at it through is like, who's it benefiting and who's it not, right? And for me, it's like the big benefit of these tools is the fact that it lowers the barrier to creation for anything you want to do now, almost, right? That's clearly a really good thing for people who don't have formal training in, any sort of, artistry, whether it's, as a writer or a painter or whatever, right? That's a good thing. Because now, to your point, Anthony, if you've got an idea, you can go from zero to realizing that idea pretty much instantaneously if you find the right tool and you understand how to use it. So I would argue that's a very good thing, right? Because now you don't have to depend on other people to carry out whatever your creative vision is. It just feels nice because I think people at their core just are inherently creative, but somewhere along the lines, the practicality of life sets in. It's like, okay, I got to go out and get a job. But I think people in general are more creative than they give themselves credit for. Certainly, more creative than others give them credit for. And I think these tools kind of return some of that creative power to these folks. On the other hand, I can totally understand why the artists who have spent, their careers and their educations learning these tools feel like they're being crowded out, because we know for a fact they are. Again, I just point to the lawsuits that are going on. So there's a tension between the people who, are benefiting, which I think is a much, much greater proportion of people, and, whose literally their rights are being infringed on, which is a smaller portion, but they've got a real voice. And, their work is essentially what's empowering all of these tools. Where it goes from here, I think, is an open question. I think that's what the HBR article does a decent job of laying out.
Yeah. I really liked what they describe as 3 possible futures, and I believe we can put the HBR article in the show notes if you would like to go through it in more detail. But if I were to highlight 2 of those possible futures, there's one that I think is maybe not even a future anymore, just a reality today. It's the first one they talk about, which they title An Explosion of AI-Assisted Innovation. And what this really captures is how AI-assisted innovation benefits from the speed at which these AI tools can really generate ideas or drafts of ideas or nuggets of ideas immediately. And so if we think about the sketch case, the sketch case is really just exciting, almost like magic for someone who is not professionally trained like myself. But that is also a workflow that can be adopted by a web designer, professional web designer, who might want to very quickly send a variety of more formalized mockups to a client, but start from their own personal sketches. And so this idea of AI assisted innovation really leveraging the speed at which AI can produce these images, and also the ability for AI to just tirelessly produce these images.
Yeah.
So maybe you are, whatever the word for writer's block is, but for an artist, maybe, if you're experiencing that, AI could help you get out of that block by just producing content without complaint. So I think that AI augmented, AI influenced innovation, AI influenced creative output is already happening today. And perhaps professionals in the creative industry, the adaptation is going to be just folding these tools into maybe the more rudimentary parts of their workflow, like the initial sketching, maybe offloading some of the more difficult parts of the process, like perhaps you have the visual output and you would like some Gen AI to write a document that describes it, and that's something that you as a creative person don't want to spend most of your time on. I think that's probably where the future is going to go in terms of creative folks collaborating with AI. I do like one of the other feature potential futures, which is that they title it Human Made Commands a Premium. And I think that's a really interesting concept, really reminiscent of some of the other discussions we've had about what kinds of skills become important as AI grows into pop culture. We talked about it more in the lens of, as an entrepreneur, if you have these tools that will help you do everything else, what becomes really valuable? We talked a lot about the human to human interaction, the ability to sell a product, the ability to understand what a market wants, what really will click with people out there has become the premium in entrepreneurship. In the same way, there is a possibility that down the line, human made commands the premium in this age where more and more things become AI generated. Whether or not that means generic, I don't know. But there is, as you said, Anthony, still this final step where AI isn't producing that final product, that final output. It's producing everything to get there, but there is still some human intervention before you actually end up with that piece of art. And I can see that happening and commanding a premium because of that human intervention.
We've talked about at length the importance of connection and being able to connect with people and mobilize them. But one of the other skills I think that will emerge as increasingly important is just judgment, right? You talk about creative tools. If you're able to generate essentially an infinite number of images for a particular project, and it doesn't have to be an image, it could be a song, it could be a video. I think ultimately the power comes in, how do you decide which one, right? Like that requires, I think, taste. And I think that will be it's the skill it's the skill in being able to curate, essentially, right? Like what's going to convert more, what strikes more of an emotional tone in the viewer. That's I think a very difficult skill, and that so far at least is not being handled by AI. To go back to ad creative for a second, if you want to generate a campaign, say on Instagram, you can generate countless iterations of essentially the same different campaign, and you can see where they're trying to eat into that space too, because above each image it'll have a percentage score on the one that's most likely to convert, right? So for me, like the ability to curate and have good taste and choose among all the noise, I think will be very important. And I don't think that necessarily is a skill that only lives with artists, right? Which is why I think, and Anthony, you and I have talked about this for a while now, there's going to be an entire class of, creatives who've only used AI tools their entire career or throughout school. They were never trained on a guitar, or they were never trained with, a camera.
Yeah.
But they make truly, I think, groundbreaking stuff because they know how to use the tools and they've got great taste.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the future of of command a premium made by humans is I think really in well effect with like furniture, because like you can go to IKEA and get like a flat box, fully machined on an AI cutter, sent around the world, and you assemble at home. or you can go and find like a master craftsman and say, look, I want to commission you to build this, chair, and here's what I want. And a chair from IKEA is $7, and a master craftsman's, could be $7,000. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, there's this pride of building that chair and buying that chair. And there's a lot there going on there. I think, it's certainly prevalent in food, and food is a very creative thing when you get down to it. So I do think AI is going to affect probably less in the food area, and I think that will be the last sort of human thing that we do, which is like this farm to table thing is going to continue to become more special. But when it comes to like when it comes to like AI and creativity and curation, I think maybe we're saying the same thing, or maybe I'm offering you an antithesis, Shane. Is that my opinion of what I like is actually probably off, and that like when you run stuff on a network of sizable size, the network will say, well, this will run better. Like it's like it's sometimes often like not my choice. It's like, wow, it's like I'm really overshooting the design mark here, because most people just want this like cruddy look. And so it's weird because like the guys that have that data is like TikTok, and they know exactly what their users want, and often it's not any form of production. It's like suddenly just something else. So it's like, it's funny because when you think about it, TikTok, you are at the other end of the algorithm. Like like you can make a million TikToks, but if you're not actually good at like making TikToks for their algorithm, you're not shown. So the algorithm favors you to make something that actually is good for them, which is like a different way of how AI works. As SEO worked differently than the way we all wanted the internet to work. It favored really esoteric sort of things that you did to your content. But I do think that might be off topic. But I do think that if you're a creator of any kind, and you are taking the road of I'm not going to use AI, it may be a noble road that will leave you in a very different place than your other co-creators. And I think what Shane was saying is it opens up the opportunity for some people that have never used any of the formal previous tools and just started their careers asking, Claude artifacts to make them code and make them image data. And then they take it into another thing and throw it in another AI and augment it more and throw it in AI, 3 and 4 and 5 and come up with something that just like literally no one else can make. Only you and your multi-shot, multi-tool approach create something that no one else knows how to do. And I think that is an actual inevitability for creators. They will do stuff that will be using a series of AI tools that will create something that is quite unique. That will include audio, video, image data, all of it remixed using multiples of AI algorithms that create something that's just their own. And it's probably already here now. We just haven't we're not highlighting it. But
yeah, that's why I think so HBR lays out these 3, potential future scenarios, and I see it less as being one of the 3 and more about being some distribution of the 3, like what how dominant are each of the 3. And I think that's really
the third that we didn't mention, sorry Shane, is that machines monopolize creativity. So we mentioned the AI powered innovation or AI partnered innovation and premium and human creativity, but the other one was machines monopolize creativity.
Yeah, and that's why. So what I was saying, I don't see it as being an either or between the 3. I think it will. The question is like, how dominant are each of these 3 going to be? And I think to go back to what you were saying, Anthony, with about my comment on taste and curation. Ultimately, it really depends on what you're doing, right? Like if you're putting out a song. If you ask someone who's a quote unquote true artist, like it's not really about what you as the listener feel. It's what I feel, right? This is my song. I'm putting it out. I don't care. I'm not optimizing it to you or the greatest number of people necessarily, right? Obviously there are different philosophies among different artists, but that's very different than say serving up a digital ad where
Yeah.
I think that will become hyper personalized, right?
Hmm.
Because now I can tailor this ad very specifically to exactly what I know about you and where you live and your purchase history and how old you are. I expect to see a ton of that.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think this is a nice segue to what I was planning to lead us to, which was maybe a more like specific breakdown of various industries and domains. And we had alluded to some earlier, but Anthony, you mentioned TikTok now. And I think, you know, technology has always disrupted creativity. I think social media is one of the, like, in recent memory, uh most evident ways in which technology has kind of disrupted the creative industry, if that's the right word, because it has spawned so many new creators. Content creator is an occupation now in a way that it wasn't before, because social media has just grown to such an enormous scale. It's reaching billions of people, a
Absolutely.
minute, right? And that feeds very nicely into this reality that Gen AI can produce content so quickly. And I wanted to sort of ask about creative people maybe looking at social media as the prime example, content creators, but also maybe even actors, musicians, where the creative person actually has to develop a new entrepreneurial skill set with Gen AI. And I think of this in terms of just, a content creator who has to think now about how to play the algorithm game. Maybe a content creator who has to play the speed game, who has to think about creative ways to fit brand partnerships into their content. And sort of, what does Gen AI in social media and maybe even film and television, what is that going to look like in the immediate future?
Anthony, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you're talking about social media because it's like I was just talking to an old colleague about my previous startup, and you when you were making when I was making social media, it was kind of like a laughing stock. It was kind of like, oh yeah, that's pretty cheesy. You're making web content. You know what I mean? Or
Mm-hmm.
and fast forward to today, it's like if you're kind of not making social media, you're absolutely like missing the whole world, right? Like it's shifted. I was just listening to two journalists talking, and it felt like I was listening to something like people that had just like emerged from like the dark ages. They're like, yeah, God, like you're publishing on Substack and I'm doing this, and I got like the whole media world is like collapsed. And it's like, yeah, like it's collapsed a long time ago. You just lost your job at Fox, and you just realized that. So like we're now there, but like your question is like, well, how does Gen AI and AI change the game for the people? And like I want to say I have some ideas. Some of them are probably not going to happen, but the AI, the algorithm game is been in effect since the web got started.
Mm-hmm.
And the TikTok game is an algorithm game. Like if you want us to be successful in TikTok, you you have to be programming towards the algorithm, meaning they don't care who you are. They don't care. They care about the
Yeah.
value you're going to give them in 2 seconds. Whereas on the Instagram algorithm, it's like, no, it's sort of still based on the old premise of social networking. It's like, who are you? Tell me a little about yourself, and then show me your value. Like it's totally different. So these algorithms are completely different, and you have to understand that. And then the web algorithm is different from all of them. And the YouTube algorithm is super different as well. They're favoring like longer form content. So all of those algorithms are AI driven, and they all are looking for a different outcome for their systems. And therefore you as a creative have to figure that out. And I think as the speed game comes up, Francesca, you mentioned, it's like, well, how do you actually make more content without burning out? I think that's where you're going to start seeing interesting ways of using AI to say, I'm part of this meme or I'm part of this story, but I've it got created by me using fragments of my voice and maybe an image, and it's doing some overlay copy, and I'm able to publish 10 of those before I could actually finish making a full video. And so you can kind of be on the category first and fastest. So I see that happening. I think also you're seeing, you're a sports fan. Al Michaels is now going to be giving, who's passed, he's going to be giving Olympic sportscast, but they worked with his estate, so you can get that, him calling the Olympic scores that way. But you could see how, like, okay, well, all sportscasters that are now no longer alive can use the facts of a sports game and just read them back to you, right? But how's that going to change newsrooms when they can just read back the facts in any voice? Like, do you really need the current?
Yeah. And so I'm really glad this came up in your answer that covered many things, because I think there is a really, really almost peculiar culture shift about Gen AI just within social media, and is different from the way we've been talking about Gen AI thus far in this podcast, because in other industries like advertising, like in marketing, perhaps in other types of design, like furniture design, fashion design, etc., it feels like opportunity. It's almost like empowerment, right? To utilize Gen AI. But in social media, and I'm thinking in particular of just the way patterns of behavior might change, i.e., now different platforms like YouTube, like Instagram, they're maybe hearing feedback from people about being duped or having received fake content or inauthentic content, and having, creators disclaim whether or not any AI generation was used, any AI manipulation was used in the content. It does feel like there is still a culture in social media of maybe some of the more nefarious uses of Gen AI, where you can manipulate, I think famously with the voices, you can manipulate videos of politicians into making them appear that they are saying something that they are not, that could be extrapolated to any public figure, could have potentially harmful consequences, like even in schools among students, if you're manipulating content of your classmate. Cyberbullying has always been the plague of social media. And so culturally, I think it's very interesting that, specific platforms like YouTube, like Instagram, have in some ways responded to this by asking creators to declare if some of the content was AI generated, in a way that, AI content is being generated everywhere. Like, it could be your coworker's email that, and your coworker's using ChatGPT. It could be some blog post that you're reading. It's all over the place. But for some reason,
or a spell checker or a grammar checker. I mean,
right.
it's kind of like it's in everything right now.
Yeah, but for some reason, it feels like on social media there is this almost flip side to Gen AI, maybe as a response to recent events, maybe the political climate, etc. And how does that, fare in parallel to maybe the opportunities that Gen AI seems to present to people who have maybe not been able to be creative in ways that they felt they ought to be?
Yeah, I mean,
it's another big question. I mean, I'm reminded, I think it was a week or two ago, Etsy changed their policies too, where you've now got to declare whether the designs that you're using in your wares, whatever it is, a t-shirt or otherwise. And it's created a lot of controversy. And one of the things I believe you're not allowed to do is sell your prompts, right? So it's like, okay, well, if the image is not your genuine creation, it's the prompt behind it. Which I know is not answering your question, but you're seeing it more and more, because I think it's a constant game of cat and mouse, I think, where the platforms obviously want to make money. Etsy obviously wants to make money. For them, I think allowing Gen AI creations, you can see why they have every incentive in the world to do it, because now you've got more creators who are able to create stuff and sell stuff. the people who've been there all the time are like, well, now I'm going to have more competition. This is not fair for me. Like, I actually am formally trained in, producing whatever this thing is. And then it's also cat and mouse in the sense of what everyone else in the market is doing and what the regulations say, right? And the regulations, I think, are just so far behind the capabilities of these tools.
Okay.
Social media is an interesting case, though, because especially since last election, we've seen just how impactful it is in the real world. It's no longer just in the digital realm anymore.
I mean, here's the thing. Maybe this is controversial. I think it's political climate. I think that's where I think I think it's political. He's like, anyone that's a real content creator knows that dating back to literally, I'm old enough to talk about Photoshop 1.0. You had these things called plugins that would do certain things to your images, like add a Gaussian blur or just do an effect, right? So there's been procedural. They didn't call it AI, but it was algorithmic, right? It was procedural affecting the image. Like every Marvel film you see is just filled with just thousands of millions of frames of procedural generated content on there. Every magazine cover we've all seen, and maybe it's not healthy, but every magazine in a fashion magazine, there's no model that you see that's not 100% augmented by the actual levels that you're shooting with, changing the colors, airbrushing in, taking out body parts, increasing body parts. So it's we have not been dealing with authentic media, meaning take a picture of me and just put me up plain. No actress is going to let you do that, right? Prior to that photo is going to be taken, you're going to hire a hairstylist and a makeup artist. They're actually in the writer. So you're augmented prior to the photo. Post the photo, you have all kinds of editors and people that are stylizing the colors, the LUTs and everything. So I don't understand I think the issue is that people are saying well, now the computer's making that choice for me. So I'm saying that there's probably a place to say this was human made, but even if a prompt made it, there's a human still in the inspiration mode of it. So I think we're going to move past this, and we're going to move back to a place that well, there is an original creator, and that was me and her, or he and him. We decided to figure out how to make this idea, and the computer generated a lot of it, and we're not going to disclose. We don't need to disclose all the stuff that went into making it. I feel that it's unfair because some people might have the money or the means to be making more stuff than others, and eliminating the tools of your craft is not, I don't think is the right way of doing it. I think that it's political climate. I actually do think the where deep fake originated was on the early web and it was actually, pornographic in nature. It was just take a photo of this actress and put it on another a naked person's body, and that was where deep fakes originated. And now the deep fakes could just be there's zero, you can't no one would be able to tell, and it's really deeply offensive to the person that's showing up in this deep fake. And I do think there is an ethical line that we need to draw where it's no, you shouldn't allow for the distribution of that. If you want to do that at your own home and your own computer, by all means. It's weird, but go ahead and do it. But distributing it on social media, I think should be there should be a line there, and we have that line now in a lot of things. But I think that the compute technology is going to continue to create new things, and I don't know if we should put hard blocks on it.
Well, I think so. I understand what you're saying, and I think one of the salient themes from the entire discussion is sort of that Gen.ai is a new technology and is, going to disrupt the creative industry in different ways, but that there has been a history of just technology causing shifts in creative, in creative jobs, in creative platforms, in just creation of different output in general. One thing I have as a counterpoint, though, to what you're saying, Anthony, is that one of the biggest criticisms with chatbots right now is hallucinations, right? That is maybe other than sounding unnatural, maybe the other deterrent for people to, from fully relying on chatbots is that if you are going to just take the output of a chatbot for your history report, for your maybe from your economics write-up, etc., the hallucinations may put you in a bad spot. And that's basically because those things are not true. And
Right. Yeah.
what
Yeah.
I think the response of these social media platforms was, it was that proliferation of untrue information, right? I think of the there have been videos on YouTube of taking a public figure's voice and making them say things,
Yeah. Which are like deep fakes.
right,
Yeah.
for years. But now we're getting to the point where it's quite difficult to perceive the fakeness. And I think that's sort of what the disclaimer format is trying to get at. I don't know that the disclaimer format is going to be effective. It feels like something that you have to buy into as a content creator, and maybe if your content isn't for nefarious purposes anyway, you're
Yeah.
likely to buy into that, but that's there to find some
Yeah.
kind of
I think
yeah.
there's a line here, right? And I feel like if you're a content creator, you make a great video, and what you do is you run it through a color pass and you change the color, or you go on your Instagram and you change all the filters. So suddenly, just your sunsets look very, very vibrant, right? It's like, well, that's an AI, that's an algorithm,
Right. But
right? I mean,
that's very different from, a
for
deepfake
sure,
of like a public figure saying something extremely
right,
inflammatory.
right. And I think different countries will have different sets of rules on that kind of
Mhm.
thing, and I think moral compasses need to arrive that are far more robust than they are today. And I do think that YouTube or TikTok, they're not government run, they're private businesses.
Yeah.
So they could say like, hey, like we make a lot of money off all this like weird stuff, like we're going to keep it going. And others might say we don't make any money on that and we're going to turn it off. So it's kind of interesting that it butts right up to like what these networks are designed to make money for shareholders. So it's their rules, right, that will apply, and those standards will then will filter down on tool makers and everything else. You know what I mean? It's kind of, which is funny because with TikTok, it's like the AI algorithm that forces people to make content to get ranked will start to favor more of that stuff, and and therefore more tools will get made, and you'll see this vicious cycle of AI arms race going on until they say we don't favor that, and then it might be like, and they might favor like, no, you make things with your hands. It's a weird thing, but I'd be curious on what Shane has a position on it, is because we've talked about different cases like this before. Shane, do you see it changing? Like, or do you see do you see that we need regulation here? I think some of what Francesca's saying seems reasonable. Like you can't take a president of the United States or a senator and make them say like racist things that make people go crazy.
Or you can.
Or you can.
And then just not like the format of YouTube Studio right now, I think is just a checkbox.
No,
so it could basically not exist.
Exactly.
Well, I would preface this by saying I'm not an attorney, and that I'm not a decelerationist by any means. I'm not advocating for slowing for an all-out pause. That is certainly not what I'm advocating for. But I think we need smart regulation the same way we need laws in society in general. But I think we should want to have as many possible capabilities as we can possibly get. And I think that's true for creative tools the way it's true for any other type of work that people want to do. But we have laws and we have norms, and I think that we shouldn't allow people to do things that violate those. The question is much grayer. The answer to the question is there's much more gray area as far as like, how do you anticipate what people are going to do with tools that just never existed before? The ones we're talking about, I think, are very obvious use cases that you can unequivocally say should be against the law, right? I think where it gets more interesting is when it's not clearly over that line, right? And I think that's the raging debate going on with creatives in the industry, and policies at companies like, Etsy. But I tend to be, I kind of look at it like free speech. Like I would say no one is really a free speech absolutist, when you really want to be exact about your words, because I think you don't want to be able to do things like, threaten the life of the president, which is obviously very relevant right now. but there should be very, very few checks on speech. And I think similarly, there should be very few checks on, what you are able to create with a lot of these new tools.
Yeah, I guess the question I have, and this has came up with odd music, because the record labels had sued people that were creating songs that sounded just like Adele or Drake,
Yeah.
and
Suno and Udio in particular.
yeah, and it's like they're selling because they believe they trained on that data.
Yeah.
But but when the song was trending, they were looking for like, they were looking for a way to actually sue them to get the cease and desist. And I feel like if you're an AI or an artist that sounds remarkably like Drake, there's no law that I know of, and I'm not a lawyer either, that says, hey, you sound just like Drake, or you made an AI that sounds just like Drake. You can't use it. Like, I think you can. I think you can use it. And I think that they're looking for like, well, now they're going back to the source, like, well, how did you train it? Well, I trained it on Drake stuff. Well, that was copyright. And so I believe that, the legal system is going to figure out how to sort of manage these tools that are allowing creators to actually do things.
Yeah.
In a way
I
that
think
they
people
weren't
in the
able to
music
do before.
industry are pretty convinced that Suno and Udio, the two companies in question here, just outright violated the law when it comes to training their models. I can't comment on that because I don't know what they did internally, but the
I don't either.
examples I've seen are convincing. But I think the key there is the music industry wants these tools to work with them to properly compensate artists. And the tricky thing there is that different artists want different things. Grimes is a perfect example of someone who's like, what, just take my likeness and voice and we'll figure it out later.
I mean,
obviously music labels probably feel very different.
Yeah,
So
and that's an
the answer,
example of like an entity that isn't even the artist themselves, right? Like that's it's a whole other entity. Like it isn't even about, if we're talking about, creators as the people who are creating the product, like it's not really Drake who has the say, or people who sell their catalogs. It is the like organizational entity, and so that's like a whole other thing as well.
Yeah, for sure. But I think of streaming, right? We have streaming because of Napster. Did streaming go away? No, right? But now we have Spotify, which is an improved version that more adequately compensates artists. I mean, I think it's next to impossible for an artist to survive on, what they make with Spotify. But it's an example of where the underlying tech didn't just go away because it caused disruption.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of there with the MP3 and the streaming again with this with AI technologies. I mean, we're going to continue to have people do this, and it's going to be there. I actually find sometimes I really wish I studied the law and knew it in command, because it just seems like you end up in these cases where you trained on this data that you didn't own. But it's like okay, that maybe there's a real case, and as not a lawyer, I don't understand it. I'm not a scholar in that area, I don't understand it. But everyone knows that when you are actually trying to become a musician, the first thing you do is you start training on their music. Like you practice their songs. You do that for a really long time until you can actually sound exactly like them, or you can make one slight change and you're similar to them, right? And so it's like, where does that lawsuit start and stop? Because I'm afraid when they start these lawsuits where they talk about training and where you got your data, it could have an unintended consequence on everyone else as well. You know what I mean? It will be quite interesting to see how it plays out. But creatively, the tools, I think where we were in sort of like the impact of these tools in all the industries, when we're talking about image generation, this happens. What is video? Video's 29.9 images played at speed. So if you can create one image, you know you can create thousands and millions of other images. So this is going to happen with video. It's going to happen with audio. It's going to, it's happening with text. So in the creative space, I believe that it's going to feel enormous stress and effect of these tools at every level, and meaning, audio, video, image, text, etc. And it's going to happen at every sort of intersection of the production pipeline.
Since we were on the topic of training, and maybe in case it isn't clear what we mean by training data, we're sort of talking about the data that an AI model is given so that it actually can learn how to produce its result. And so in the case of music, you might be training this AI model on a bunch of songs by artists so that it could produce a result. And it has learned what those artists have produced sonically so that it could produce its own thing. I'm curious, as we, start to wrap up, and I want to pivot to what the future might look like with Gen AI. I'm curious if there will be a market in the future where an artist, someone in the creative industry, perhaps this is a new form of creative venture, becomes an artist for training sets, where that is sort of the pipeline for, maybe you are creating some Gen AI image generator for advertising. You commission artists to produce training data for your models.
Sure.
And that is the compensation that they get. No longer, artists producing things and then for public consumption, but just for consumption of these models.
I mean, I think, I think that people now know how these tools work, and they could get sort of a base model of some kind, like a neural network that can actually do something, and then they could say, we're going to fill its data set with this team of artists' work that we've paid.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
So give me 1 million pictures of pie. You give me 1 million pictures of cakes. You give me 1 million pictures of, and so you can refute the argument that it's copywritten material because you're like, I've made this, but you can kind of extrapolate that with every category, like music, and text and all that. And I think there are people working on that right now.
Do you think they really need to, though? I mean, you think about things like synthetic data, right? Which is essentially just artificial data, right? That's used to train these models.
I mean, I think that's what they would.
So
I think that's what they do. They would commission artists to build the first primitives, Shane, and then hit the synthetic button.
Yeah, where you're just making a ton of variations of a photo. I just don't know that, like, I can see where, you want to compensate the original creators. I think that's the thing we should do. But I forgot what the prediction is, that, essentially we will very soon hit the point where we've already trained all these models on all the data that just
right.
And therefore, to make further improvements, we're going to need to train on new data that we essentially just create, right? I just don't, I can see where maybe an artist, is part of that process, but I can also see what I think more likely scenario where it's just done by the company who's training the model.
Yeah.
Like, we have enough already. Why do we need to go out and pay? Unless you're paying for new, actually novel creative works.
Well, that's what I was going to say, right? Is I think really the biggest unanswerable question to date is sort of what the definition of art and creativity will be because of Gen AI. Because to me, training data, even though maybe as function works similarly to someone learning the guitar and maybe training themselves on a bunch of Metallica songs, like those to me, even though the sort of step in the process or step in the pipeline, they're at similar steps, those are still two very different things to me. And when I think of like inspiration as being the like pre-production or pre-ideation step for an artist, like I don't know how that gets captured because I think training an AI model is still separate from that in terms of just how I perceive creativity, how I perceive sort of maybe the taste that you were talking about, Shane. I don't know that training a model really develops taste or curation or inspiration in the way that it feels very easy to perceive on a human to human basis.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think there will continue to be a premium on judgment, right? Because, and the point that stood out to me the most in that HBR article, I won't make you guys wait for me to find it, but it essentially was saying that the power of these models really lies in their ability to enable you to instantaneously retrieve any information that you want and be able to then, analyze and act on it, right? But the implication there is like, okay, you have this capability. What are you going to do next? Right. I think that's where, at least for now, and I can easily make the case that it can go away very soon in the future. I think, your value as the human comes in, the decider, right? Which one am I going to use? But I will go back to ad creative again as an example of where a glimpse into where I think we're going. And it is situationally dependent. Ad creative is very much for converting. We want to convert this Instagram campaign, this TikTok ad, this banner ad. And I think the more and more our lives become digitized, the more the model will be able to make that judgment for you. It's like, look, we've created 10 billion of these images. We know for a fact with, this combination of pixels and words, this is the best one. That is the judgment, right? So the question for me is like, how long before we get there? Because to me, in certain contexts, we are definitely going there where you almost just don't need the human at all. I can very easily envision that future.
Well, yeah, and we're there now with Facebook because Facebook used to build all these custom audiences, and Facebook's now advertising platforms like, we don't need you to develop those audiences. We can develop them for you, and it's a different ad product. So like on their side, they know how to target their users because it's their users. It's the same with Instagram. And then as you match that,
TikTok is the extreme example, right? Entirely algorithmic.
So you asked a kind of interesting question, because we got to wrap in where creativity goes, and a lot of people don't like what I'm about to say. So I'll play the bad guy on this. But it's kind of there at the end of TikTok is an algorithm. You don't know what you're going to get. You just keep sliding. It's like a dating app. You just keep sliding. You don't know. You're just sliding. At some point, TikTok could just be like, we don't even need creators as much as we just already know what this person wants, that we can just create on the fly. Like we can create on the fly what this person wants and forever just keep them. I think that's possible in TikTok, and the business model might reward that. I think it gets really quite interesting when you go to like the Netflix model, where it's like, well, we already know these people like these shows, and we can low cost produce a show like a documentary where you just bought a bunch of photos and you assemble it and you have a talk track over it. Boom, give it to them. You've now lowered the cost of production by, let's say, 90%. You know what I mean? And the consumer likes watching that. And you can kind of go to the next level. It's like, hey, I'm not a huge music fan. I just need some background music. I just want ambient chill. Like, I don't just like at some point the algorithm is like, hey, we know you want ambient chill. Boom. Hey, we know you want classical. It's not like you're asking for Mahler's Ninth. You're just asking for classical music. Well, that can be simulated. So you could start seeing that these algorithms can kind of like move in and actually just create what you want. And if it's sort of ambient enough, you might not care. But if you want to go and drive to a movie or to see a live show, you're going to want to see human-made stuff. But it's that ambient stuff, that lean back stuff, which is a significant part of the creative process, market economy right now. You know what I mean?
Well, that's kind of what Francesca led off by saying, hearkening back to our conversation about the ability to connect with people. And I think, creative work is doing that. You're just not necessarily there. The art is doing it for you. The image is doing it for you. The song is doing it for you. I think the desire a lot of people have is we don't want to lose the human contribution to that, no matter how good it is, right?
Well, I mean, that's where that's where that HBS article comes in. It's like, human premium.
Yeah, that's why I think there will be some distribution where, I'm convinced that at some point in the not too distant future, we will just have the majority of all content will be generated,
Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
it's text or image or otherwise. And
To me,
there
oh
will
yeah,
still
go.
be a very high premium, I think, placed on the truly human generated stuff. But I still
Mhm.
think those people, for the most part, in a lot of cases, I would say at least, will be augmented by AI every step of the way, right? Whether it's the
Yeah.
brainstorming or casting, getting data. We already do this to some extent.
Mhm.
I think purely for competitive reasons we'll do it. And also because, quite frankly, even in, a creative endeavor, there's a lot of stuff you do that, is just like busy work.
Yeah. I would say that I agree. It is very, I mean, it really comes back to that first piece of advice that you said, Shane, where think about what it is you're using this Gen AI for. What is the purpose of this creative endeavor? And it's very clear that there are just immense opportunities in certain industries, like in the advertising space, like even in social media creation, playing up to certain algorithms, maybe that is the opportunity for really leveraging AI and having these technological developments sort of infiltrate in these creative platforms and in these creative tools because of what they are good at, which is that they are scalable, they're fast, that they can be trained on lots of different kinds of data and maybe extrapolate, bits that you really want. And it just reminds me, I started with an anecdote from when I would teach high school students, and I'll probably end with a similar anecdote, which was on the very first day that we sort of taught them what machine learning was. One of the questions that I was asked when I was learning about AI, and that I like to then ask other people who are learning AI about the first time is, what is an AI good at? And what is a human good at? And to me, the answers to those questions fit really nicely into this topic of AI and creativity, or AI in the creative industry. And AI is really good at, machines are really good at doing things quickly. We saw that with calculators, like a prime example of just getting an instantaneous, a correct answer. They're doing things quickly and doing things at scale. And that's AI has brought that to unprecedented levels. And what a human is good at is that it doesn't need to be trained on immense amounts of data, that a baby can maybe touch a hot pan once and know to never touch a hot pan again. And an AI doesn't know how to do that. And so there is this dichotomy where in industries where speed, scale, maybe personalized content at scale are really advantageous, like marketing, Gen AI is going to be just where all the opportunities are. And then in that human to human contact, where maybe you do want that expert craftsmanship, maybe you want that one of a kind piece, maybe you want something that only a human can understand the specific articulation, read your body language, fit the tone, even see the physical space of your home, then you want that
Yeah.
extra special, Italian chair.
Yeah, by the way, a lot of people talk about, blockchain technology and artificial intelligence as if they're antithetical, but to me, this is a prime example of where they can, and I think very much will, go hand in hand, where you want to be able to determine the provenance of, an image or a song or whatever it is, verify its veracity and ownership. I just think we're heading to a future where literally anything a human can do, a machine will be able to do at some point. The question for me is, when, not if. And I think in the meantime, people, which we encourage every episode, should really start to experiment with these tools, whatever your opinion is towards it philosophically or ideologically, because there is a right way to use these and still, I think, maintain a lot of authenticity in what you're doing, even if it's creative work.
Yeah, I was going to say, and maybe we'll wrap it up. Francesca, you take the last word, but I do feel like you as a creative person, ignoring this is probably not a safe bet. You as a creative person adopting, using these tools to inform yourself and perhaps find some new acceleration in your career or your work effort is, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. But more importantly, and I think is that you could actually have an impact on the way these companies think about building them, or by you being proficient with them, they'll adopt what you're doing and you can have a real impact. And so our position is it's happening, it's going to happen, and you should follow along. And we're happy to, in future episodes, talk about specific applications, or you can join one of our Zoom meetings where we're talking about or doing it together, or you could read some of our articles. But I'll hand it over to you, Francesca, to wrap us up and send us on our way.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you both said, which is that regardless of where you fall in terms of maybe ideology for AI and creative pursuits, what discipline you're in, what professional space you're in, familiarizing yourself with sort of the realities of AI is going to become just very important. And it could be something as simple as the workflow we talked about, where you open one of these tools like Midjourney and you attempt making an image, and you sort of sit with that, you go through the process, and then familiarizing yourself with maybe tools in your industry, maybe the news, like these cases that are involving creative companies and technology companies, just embedding yourself in the AI space, because it is becoming just a given part of reality. One thing I will say is that at Co-AI, we have always promoted this idea of human in the loop and human intervention. And I think the fear, specifically for creativity and Gen AI, is sort of the removal of the human in the loop. And I personally don't think that will ever be the desired outcome for any space that AI makes advancements in, but particularly in creativity. And so maybe ending on this note that the human in the loop might just mean different ways in which the human stays in the loop, or different kinds of understanding in terms of the place for really quick, really scalable AI and this expert human eye, this expert human taste, and this interpersonal connection. And I did mention Co-AI, so I think Shane can tell you how to find us and what other things are in store. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the website is getcoai, that's COAI.com. Come check us out. We say it all the time because we genuinely mean it. We'd love to hear from you. If you find yourself on this journey and you have no idea what to do or what to look for or how to use something, we want to hear from you. We'll try to post as many of the resources and articles and tools we mentioned in the show notes. And I would just encourage you to keep coming back to the site. We've got leaderboards there that list out the many different tools in image generation and well beyond. Publish daily news. There's a ton of stuff there. But like I said, we'd love to hear from you. And thanks for listening.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of the week. We will see you maybe Friday, right? If not sooner. Talk to you guys later. Bye.